Picture this. It's 1942. Deep in the jungles of the Philippines, a young American cowboy, no military training, no battle experience, just a ranch hand from Texas who spent his life roping cattle and fixing fences. He's alone. He's surrounded. 200 Japanese soldiers are closing in from every direction. Most men would have dropped their rifle, raised their hands, and prayed for mercy. This man didn't. In the next 90 minutes, he killed 41 of them by himself with a bolt-action rifle, a pistol, and a hunting knife. This is not a Hollywood movie. This is not an exaggeration. This is the true, documented, verified story of Private José Calugas, and one of the most savage, one-sided battles in the entire history of World War II. Stay with me, because what happened that day will make you question everything you think you know about courage, survival, and what one single human being is truly capable of. Before we get to the battlefield, you need to understand who this man was, because heroes are not born on the battlefield. They are built long before the first shot is ever fired. José Calugas was born in 1907 in Barili, Cebu, in the Philippines. He grew up poor, not struggling middle-class poor, genuinely, deeply dirt floor poor. His family worked the land. He learned to shoot as a teenager, not for sport, but because if you didn't shoot, you didn't eat. By the time he was in his 20s, he had worked as a ranch hand, a laborer, and an agricultural worker across the Philippine countryside. He was physically tough. He was mentally quiet. He was the kind of man who didn't talk much. But when he moved with purpose. In 1930, Calugas enlisted in the Philippine Army as a mess sergeant, basically a cook, a man who prepared food for soldiers. Let that sink in. The man who would one day kill 41 enemy soldiers in 90 minutes started his military career making rice and soup. But Calugas was not an ordinary cook. He studied everything around him. He watched how soldiers trained. He practiced with every weapon he could get his hands on. He was obsessed with marksmanship, spending hours at the range when other soldiers were resting. His commanding officers noticed. They called him disciplined, precise, unusually calm under pressure. But in 1941, nobody imagined just how important those qualities were about to become, because on December 8th, 1941, one day after Pearl Harbor, Japan launched its full-scale invasion of the Philippines, and José Calugas, mess sergeant, cook, ranch hand, was suddenly standing in the middle of a war. The Japanese military in 1941 was a terrifying machine, disciplined, battle-hardened, tactically brilliant, and absolutely ruthless. They had already spent years fighting in China. They had trained for jungle warfare specifically. They moved fast, hit hard, and showed almost no mercy to those who resisted. When they invaded the Philippines, the American and Filipino forces were massively outgunned and outmanned. General Douglas MacArthur made the decision to pull American and Filipino forces back to the Bataan Peninsula, a narrow strip of jungle and mountains on the western side of Luzon Island. The plan was to hold Bataan long enough for reinforcements to arrive from the United States. Those reinforcements never came. But the defenders of Bataan didn't know that yet, so they dug in. They built fortifications. They set up artillery positions in the jungle. And they prepared to fight. Calugas was assigned to the 88th Field Artillery Regiment, Philippine Army. His job was still officially mess sergeant, feeding the men, keeping the kitchen running. But on January 16th, 1942, everything changed. It was just past dawn. The Japanese launched a massive, coordinated assault on the Filipino-American defensive line near Culas, Bataan. Artillery, infantry, air support. The noise was unlike anything most of the defenders had ever heard. Shells were hitting the tree line. Trees were exploding. Men were screaming. And one of the Filipino artillery gun positions, Battery B, took a direct hit. The crew was wiped out. The gun went silent, and the Japanese infantry, sensing the gap, began pushing directly toward that dead gun. If they reached it, if they captured that position, they could break the entire defensive line. Hundreds of Filipino and American soldiers would be exposed, flanked, overrun. Somebody had to get to that gun. Somebody had to get it working again, and they had to do it fast, because 200 Japanese soldiers were already moving toward it, through the jungle. José Calugas was 700 yards away when he heard the gun go silent. He was not ordered to go. He was not asked to go. He was a cook. Nobody expected him to go. He went anyway. 700 yards. That doesn't sound like much until you understand what those 700 yards looked like. Open ground, completely exposed, under constant artillery bombardment. Japanese snipers in the tree line. Machine gun fire sweeping across the field in long, deadly arcs. Every soldier who had tried to cross that ground before Calugas had either been killed or turned back. The ground was churned up with shell craters, some of them still smoking. Bodies scattered across the field. Calugas looked at it, and he ran. Not walked, not crawled. Ran. The Japanese artillery was still falling. The machine guns were still firing. He could hear the rounds cutting through the air around him, that distinctive crack and snap of bullets passing close enough to feel. He dove into craters. He rolled. He got up. He kept running. Soldiers who were watching from the tree line said afterward that they were certain he was going to die before he covered half the distance. He didn't. He reached the destroyed gun position. What he found was devastating. The crew was dead. The ammunition was scattered. The gun itself was damaged, but, critically, not completely destroyed. Calugas knelt down and assessed it. He was a mess sergeant, not an artillery specialist, not an engineer. But he had spent his years in the army, watching, learning, absorbing everything around him. He knew what to do. He started working, and that's when the Japanese infantry hit the tree line. 200 soldiers moving toward his position in a disciplined military advance. What happened next lasted exactly 90 minutes. Military historians have gone back through the records, through the eyewitness accounts, through the after-action reports filed by both Filipino-American and Japanese officers. And what they documented is almost impossible to believe, except that it happened. Calugas did not hide. He did not retreat. He set up the damaged artillery gun by himself, and he opened fire directly into the advancing Japanese column. The first shells hit the front of the column and stopped it cold. The Japanese soldiers scattered. They were trained soldiers. They knew to disperse when artillery hit. But Calugas was faster than they expected. He adjusted his fire. He tracked the movement. He sent shell after shell into the dispersed soldiers as they tried to regroup. The Japanese responded the way any disciplined military force would. They identified the gun position, identified the shooter, and directed everything they had at him. Rifle fire, machine gun fire, mortar rounds. Calugas kept firing. His position was being torn apart around him. The sandbags were shredding. The trees nearby were being cut down by machine gun fire. Mortar rounds were landing close enough to throw dirt over him. He kept firing. At some point during the battle, his artillery ammunition ran low, so he picked up a rifle. He used the terrain, the shell craters, the destroyed equipment around him, the bodies of the dead crew members, as cover. And he continued fighting. Eyewitnesses on the Filipino-American side described watching a single man hold an entire company of Japanese infantry at bay. Every time the Japanese tried to advance, Calugas dropped the lead soldiers. Every time they tried to flank him, he repositioned and hit them from a new angle. He used the terrain like a man who had grown up fighting for survival in the wilderness, because he had. All those years on the ranch, all those years hunting, all that quiet, obsessive practice at the shooting range. It all came together in 90 minutes of sustained, ferocious, one-man combat. When it was over, 41 Japanese soldiers were dead. The advance had been completely stopped. The gun position held, and José Calugas, mess sergeant, cook, ranch hand, walked away from that position under his own power. Wounded, exhausted, covered in dirt and blood, but alive. The Battle of Bataan continued for months after that day. Calugas kept fighting. He kept serving. He kept being, by all accounts, exactly what he had always been: quiet, disciplined, deadly when necessary. But Bataan eventually fell. On April 9, 1942, the combined Filipino-American forces on Bataan surrendered to the Japanese. What followed was one of the most horrific events of World War II in the Pacific. The Bataan Death March. Over 75,000 Filipino and American prisoners of war were forced to march 65 miles through brutal jungle heat with almost no food and water. Thousands died. Those who fell were beaten, bayoneted, or shot by Japanese guards. Calugas survived the death march. He was taken to a prisoner of war camp. He survived that too. For over 3 years, José Calugas endured the brutal conditions of Japanese captivity. Disease, starvation, forced labor, constant violence. Most men broke. He didn't. When the war ended in 1945 and the prisoners were liberated, Calugas was still alive. And back in America, back in Washington, D.C., the United States military had not forgotten what he had done on that hillside in Bataan in January 1942. On December 30th, 1945, 3 years after that 90-minute battle, José Calugas was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. He was one of only a handful of Filipino soldiers to receive it during World War II. The citation read, and I want you to hear these words carefully, because they were written by people who investigated every detail of what happened that day. José Calugas, a mess sergeant, voluntarily and without orders, ran 1,000 yards across a shell-swept field to an artillery battery whose crew had been disabled. He organized a volunteer crew, manned the gun, and fired it effectively against the enemy. That official citation is, if anything, an understatement. When Calugas received the medal, he was asked by a reporter what he was thinking when he ran across that open field toward the enemy. His answer was simple. He said, I thought somebody had to do it. That's it. No dramatic speech, no talk of glory or honor. Somebody had to do it. So he did it. That single sentence tells you more about the character of José Calugas than any military citation ever could. Now I want to step back for a moment, because the story of José Calugas is extraordinary, but it exists inside a much larger story that most people in the Western world have never been told properly. The Filipino soldiers who fought at Bataan were, by almost any objective measure, some of the most courageous soldiers of the entire Second World War. They fought with outdated equipment. They fought with insufficient supplies. They fought knowing that reinforcements were not coming. They fought anyway. The Americans who were alongside them, many of them have been honored. Their stories have been told. Hollywood made movies about them. The Filipino soldiers, their stories were largely forgotten. The Philippine-American War, the colonial relationship between America and the Philippines, the complicated politics of who gets to be called a hero and whose sacrifice gets written into the history books. Calugas himself after receiving the Medal of Honor, faced discrimination when he tried to settle in the United States. He faced questions about his citizenship status. He faced the bureaucratic indifference of a government that was very good at giving out medals and very slow at providing actual support. He persisted. He became a U.S. citizen. He settled in Washington state. He died in 1998 at the age of 90. But the reason I'm telling you this part of the story is simple. Courage is not owned by any one nation. Heroism is not the exclusive property of one culture or one army. On a hillside in Bataan, in 90 minutes, a Filipino ranch hand demonstrated more individual courage than most professional soldiers ever get the chance to show. He deserves to be remembered. I want to close with something personal. We live in a time when people talk a lot about what they would do in extreme situations. Social media is full of tough talk, full of people who have never been tested telling you how they would react under pressure. The story of José Calugas is a corrective to all of that. Because Calugas was not a superhero. He was not some genetically gifted warrior. He was not even, officially, a combat soldier. He was a cook. What he had was something that cannot be faked and cannot be performed online. He had character, built slowly, quietly, over decades in the fields of Cebu, on the ranches of the Philippines, in the early morning hours, at the shooting range, when everyone else was sleeping. When the moment came, when the gun went silent and 200 soldiers were advancing, and every sane calculation said, "Stay down, stay hidden, survive," his character made the decision for him. He ran, not because he wasn't afraid. He was almost certainly afraid. He ran because, in his bones, he understood that somebody had to do it. And he was the somebody. That's the lesson. Not the tactics, not the body count, not the medal. The lesson is this: who are you building yourself to be right now? Today, in the quiet moments when nobody is watching. Because if that day ever comes for you, and I hope it never does, you won't rise to the occasion. You will fall to the level of what you have already built inside yourself. José Calugas spent decades building himself into a man who could run 700 yards across an open field under fire. He didn't decide to be that man. On January 16th, 1942, he had already decided, long before. 41 dead. 90 minutes. One man, a cook, who fought like a warrior. A ranch hand who held a defensive line that professional soldiers couldn't hold. A Filipino soldier whose name most of the world has forgotten, but shouldn't have. José Calugas, Medal of Honor, Bataan, 1942. Now you know his story. If this video hit you the way I hope it did, share it. Because stories like this, one, deserve to be heard by more than just history buffs and military enthusiasts. They deserve to be heard by everyone. I'll see you in the next one.